My Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and I've talked before about the difference between movie and book Aragorn and how the character development of each is really different. In some ways, there's not a lot of character development for book Aragorn because he's actually a well developed character by the time we meet him, being 87 years old. Kind of makes sense. But there is the actual problem that he has, which I talked about recently, of having a lot of significant self doubt in the wake of Gandalf's fall and apparent, permanent demise, and how he seems to overcome that eventually when it comes to deciding which way to go when the Fellowship breaks up. Does he follow Frodo and Sam and try to help finish the quest, or does he follow on the trail of Merry and Pippin to rescue them? After this, he seems to have kind of recovered his full confidence, and especially once Gandalf the White is in the picture, he's, in full hero mode, pretty much. The other interesting thing about this, which occurred to me, is Aragorn's decision on this, as compared to the way it's made in the movie, is radically different, and it also kind of gives us a mini preview of the choices of Master Samwise chapter, where Sam, who is left literally all alone, as far as he knows, has to make some very difficult choices and figure out how to proceed with a quest which seems to be utterly in ruin. So I want to look at the difference between book and movie, not necessarily Aragorn per se, but the situation in which Aragorn finds himself, how that creates a very different type of feel for the decision he has to make, and how it kind of mirrors in some ways what Samwise will do later at the beginning of The Return of the King. So the first thing to note as far as movie and book differences is what Aragorn knows and when. In the movie, Aragorn knows kind of everything almost immediately, because before the Uruk-hai actually show up, at least on screen, he already knows that Frodo is leaving and going off by himself to Mordor because he runs into Frodo at the foot of the seat of Amon Hen. And therefore he also knows that Boromir tried to take the ring. And, that tells Aragorn almost everything he needs to know to make his later decision right off the bat, before he even knows he's going to have to make a decision. Which, spoils a lot of tension that gets created in the book, which I'll get to in a minute. The other thing that Aragorn knows pretty quickly is that, well, I say pretty quickly, but I mean, it's really just as soon as he knows that Merry and Pippin are gone, he knows it's just Merry and Pippin, because he already knows what's happened to Frodo and Sam, pretty much. He doesn't know Sam, but he very quickly finds out. When he talks to Boromir as he's dying, Boromir says they took the little ones, and then he asks, where is Frodo? So he knows he's not talking about Frodo, so he knows he's talking about, at most, Merry, Pippin, and Sam. Soon thereafter, when they're trying to, get all their stuff together, and they've sent Boromir off in a boat to fall down the Falls of Rauros, Legolas will straight up say, Frodo and Sam have reached the eastern shore. Well, okay, we know it's not Frodo and Sam that have been taken. We know it's Merry and Pippin. So, we know where Sam is gone. He's gone with Frodo, and he already has made the decision not to follow Frodo. And so there's no decision left to be made at this point in the movie. It's literally, Frodo's gone. I've already decided not to follow him. There's nothing left but to follow and try to rescue Merry and Pippin. That's it. This is also very different because in the movie, Legolas literally sees Frodo and Sam on the opposite shore of the river, whereas in the book, they kind of have to deduce this. And I'll get to that in a minute. So let's kind of rewind a little bit and set the stage in the book. In the book, Boromir goes off. He confronts Frodo. Frodo runs off invisible. Boromir finally comes back to the rest of the group, and which incidentally, it's kind of weird how all this works in the movie, because in the book, what sets everybody going off in different directions trying to find Frodo is the fact that Boromir comes back and tells them, I tried to, I got kind of rough with Frodo and he put on the ring, and I'm not really going to say anything else, and it's been maybe an hour since he vanished, and everybody's like, what? Been too long, we got to go find him. Aragorn tries to get everybody to calm down, but they all just kind of run off in different directions, which is not very helpful for a search party. Nevertheless, it's not really clear why in the movie everybody is off running around looking for him, other than we know that Aragorn noticed that Boromir wasn't around as soon as Merry asked, where's Frodo? Did they all just decide, hey, we got to go on a search party just because those two happen to be gone? Okay, Aragorn has already had a pretty good hint from Boromir in the movie that he wants the ring, and therefore, or at least that he wants everybody to go to Minas Tirith rather than going east, and therefore he has this other problem going on where, if they're alone, we might need to do something about that. But is that a reason for them all to split up? And it's kind of weird. It's not really ever explained why they're all split up and searching for them in this way. So we get the whole setup in the book where Boromir comes back and tells them that Frodo has vanished and has been gone for maybe an hour. He's not really sure. And that's what sets off the panic, and they all run. Aragorn follows Sam, who is the first one to run off, naturally, and overtakes him and passes him and goes to the seat of Amon Hen, hoping he can just see something. Not a bad hope, actually, as it turns out that Frodo saw quite a lot from Amon Hen, but Aragorn is not so lucky, unfortunately. Well, the next thing Aragorn knows, he's seeing dead Boromir. He doesn't meet up with Frodo. He doesn't meet up with anybody else other than when he passes Sam. And as a result, Aragorn knows nothing when he talks to Boromir. And when he asks Boromir, what happened, the only thing he knew beforehand was that he told Boromir to go after Merry and Pippin, because they ran off shortly after Sam, and he said, go and take care of them. He's going after Sam. Legolas and Gimli can take care of themselves, right? So he knows nothing, and he asks him, did you see Frodo? And he never gets to answer that question. The only other thing he knows is that something happened with, Merry and Pippin, apparently, but he doesn't know if Frodo was involved in that, and he doesn't know if anybody else was involved in that, because, he's been gone off on his own thing for a little bit. Sam's not with him because he left Sam in his dust. So he has literally no idea who might have been taken by the Uruk-hai, and Boromir never gets a chance to clarify that before he dies. Aragorn knows nothing! So he's thinking it's quite possible that the Uruk-hai have actually made off with potentially all 4 of the hobbits, which would be really bad. And then, he finally meets up with Legolas and Gimli again when they find him standing or sitting next to Boromir. And as a result, they now have to decide what they're going to do. And it's like they make the hard decision of, we've got to take care of Boromir's body. We can't just leave it here, even though it's going to cause us a lot of delay. So they get all that done. They start working on that. Legolas goes back to the boats to get one to put Boromir in. And he's like, I found some interesting information there. And they go back, and Aragorn looks around. Sam's pack is missing, so they think Sam is probably gone. And they also figure Frodo is probably gone. And Aragorn kind of deduces what has happened. So in a sense, by the time he has to make his decision, he kind of knows exactly the same thing that he knows in the movie, except for a few differences. But the way he comes about it, there's this long period where in Aragorn's mind, he's got a lot of tension. Now, we as the reader, of course, already know where Frodo and Sam are, because when this happens in the book, it's the beginning of the Two Towers, and we know that Frodo and Sam have already gone off on their own at the end of the Fellowship. The tension is only present from the perspective of Aragorn, but we can at least feel the tension of his anxiety in terms of he has to make a decision, and he doesn't have all the information. By the time he makes the decision, that tension is mostly resolved in the sense of he knows most of the same kind of information, but it took him a while to get there, and so that he's, you also know that for the past couple chapters at least, he's been really doubting himself and his decisions because he just keeps talking about how every decision he makes goes wrong. As a result of this, you could feel, if you're paying attention, the palpable anxiety that he must really have going on. So he's like, man, what am I going to do now? Everything's falling apart. Well, he's got to this point, and at that stage where he makes the decision, the lack of knowledge is gone. We still have another factor that's not in the movie that is in the book that still leaves us with some tension. One of the things that we know in the book, and that has come up before this point, and that Frodo has in his mind, is that Aragorn feels like he's being called to go to Minas Tirith. In the movie, of course, this is totally not the case, because we never get the part of Boromir's and Faramir's dream where the rhyme says, "Seek for the sword that was broken." We don't get that part. And as a result, we never have this whole idea of there being kind of a prophetic calling of Aragorn to come to Minas Tirith to restore the kingship. And for the first 1.5 movies at least, well, really kind of 2 movies, Aragorn is very resistant to the idea of being king of Gondor and or Arnor, and is just really pushing back on that whole idea. So he's not at all interested in going, which is why in the movie, when they finally park near, the Falls of Rauros, he says, here's our plan from here. After we take some rest, we're going to get across the river, we're going to take the Imminmuil, and we'll come to Mordor from the north. And we get the little comedic line from Gimli where he says, oh yeah, it's just a simple matter of crossing the Imminmuil and an impassable labyrinth of razor-sharp rocks and all this stuff. And then he says, that's our road, take some rest. It's like, Aragorn is clearly planning to go with Frodo, whereas in the book, he was never planning to go with Frodo, but after Gandalf's death, he now feels like he has some obligation to, because now Gandalf is not part of the quest and can't be Frodo's guide in this last part of that journey. And so he feels like he's obligated to kind of take up that role, even though he also feels called to go to Minas Tirith because of the prophecy. This is what is in Frodo's mind as he's trying to, work up the courage to do what he knows he has to do. He knows Aragorn feels like he needs to go that way, but he knows he needs to go the opposite direction. And he doesn't want anybody else to go with him, but he's also terrified of going alone. So there's this tension of Aragorn wants to go both ways. He wants to go with Frodo and help him, but he also wants to go the other direction because he's feeling called to do that in a literal sense, but also not just called to do it, also it's like what he wants to do, because if he wants to get the girl in the end, he has to become king of Gondor and Arnor. That's the backdrop in the book, not so much in the movie. So that tension is still present, and that tension gives him a lot more pause, because now he's in this position where he knows most everything as far as where everybody is. The one thing he doesn't really know is that Frodo is going off intentionally alone, although he kind of surmises that too based on comments that Sam had made earlier, and also the fact that Frodo and Sam took the boats and left everybody behind. He kind of figures, this is what Frodo is doing. He's leaving us alone. He doesn't know this in the way that he knows it in the movie, because Frodo literally straight up pretty much tells him, they have a conversation. But he knows it in the sense that Sam has already kind of explained the way Frodo thinks, or the way he thinks, and Strider, Aragorn, agrees with that reasoning. He's like, yeah, I think you're right, actually. And what has actually taken place, shows something like that is probably going on. Whereas, what are the other options, really? I mean, like, Frodo and Sam would have waited around for him. I mean, they could have waited, I guess, but there's Uruk-hai in the woods, so it's like, we don't know for sure that he ran off because of that. He could have just tried to get away from the orcs. We don't know. But at the end of the day, the point being, Aragorn doesn't exactly know that in the way that he knows it in the movie, but he knows probably that's what's going on, and therefore there's not a whole lot of tension in terms of deciding at that point do I go with Frodo or do I go after Merry and Pippin in terms of which would Frodo prefer I do? That's not really the issue. Aragorn in the book still has some sense that he kind of owes an obligation to the quest, but he seems to resolve this in favor of going after Merry and Pippin because he seems to have figured out, yeah, Frodo has kind of decided to go off on his own, and, that seems to be a legitimate choice, and I'm not going to interfere with it. But that tension is there. He is still dealing with the whole idea of Gandalf is gone, and therefore I'm, as the new leader of the company, kind of responsible for Frodo. But I'm also responsible for Merry and Pippin, which is why he has to sit and think about it for a while. He doesn't just, in the movie, it's a really clear-cut, like, Legolas is like, hey, if we hurry, we could get to Frodo and Sam, and Aragorn's just like, nope, Ringbearer's fate's no longer in our hands. That is not how it goes down in the book. In the book, Aragorn is like, we have to make a hard choice. Do we go after Frodo and Sam, or do we follow after Merry and Pippin? And at, the end of a significant think, he basically says, my heart speaks clearly at last, we have to go rescue Merry and Pippin. And you can see why he reaches that decision. It makes a lot of sense, but it's also still a heart-wrenching decision because he is leaving the fate of the quest up to two hobbits who don't know where they're going or how they're going to get there, and off in the wilderness by themselves. You have to remember, too, when Strider in Bree first met these four hobbits, they were all pretty clueless and dumb when it came to being careful in an adventure setting. And Frodo in particular seemed not very careful. So some of this may be in the background of his mind. Like, do I really want to trust the quest to these two morons? Like, they're clearly not morons anymore. They've come through a lot, and they've grown quite a bit as characters by now. But you have to wonder how much of that is still in Aragorn's thinking, and he's not just totally willing to be like, oh yeah, Frodo and Sam, totally capable heroes, they can manage this all on their own. But in any event, he, does wrestle with all the factors that he has going on, his call to Minas Tirith, Merry and Pippin being captives that need to be rescued, Frodo and Sam going off, but potentially, probably needing help at some point down the road. And I can really only surmise that at the end of the day, Aragorn, knowing probably that Frodo has gone off on his own intentionally, and that Merry and Pippin are probably the more helpless of the two groups, he basically leaves Frodo and the quest up to Providence? I mean, there's really no better way to put it, because if you look at it from a practical standpoint, the odds of Frodo and Sam ever making it into Mordor at all, let alone to the fires of Mount Doom on their own, that's not happening. But Aragorn and Gandalf and, the best characters in the story, they have a certain amount of reliance on Providence because they know that's probably the only way this quest succeeds anyway. It's not going to happen because they're super smart and really cool and talented. That's not the way that they're planning to win. That's the whole framework of the decision to send the ring to the fire was not, this is the practically most workable option. No, it was, this is literally the only option that'll actually work long term, and therefore we have to choose it, and therefore we have to rely on, Providence to carry it out, or at least help us carry it out. Which, they have Boromir and Faramir's dream to help kind of inform the idea that Providence is involved in all of this, because they wouldn't be having dreams if it wasn't. So, there's all that in the backdrop, but essentially that's what his decision comes down to. I have a duty to Merry and Pippin to rescue them, to some extent, and Providence isn't necessarily going to help them, because their part in the quest is not, obviously, from Aragorn's point of view, one that has to succeed in some sense. Frodo's is. If Frodo fails, everything's done, right? If Merry and Pippin get taken to Isengard, tortured, and, who knows what, that won't lead to the end of the quest. Although as it turns out, their role in the overall War of the Ring is much more important than would be obvious to Aragorn at this point in time. So what does Aragorn do? Providence will take care of what it needs to take care of. I will take care of things that I don't know are going to be taken care of by Providence. That's the decision he makes. So, having looked at that and how the tension between the two is different and how the decision made is made in different terms, the other interesting part of this is how it kind of presages the choices of Master Samwise much later. The interesting thing about the choices of Master Samwise is it kind of mirrors, but on a much more extreme scale, the kind of tension that Aragorn has. Like Aragorn, Sam is going to be in a position where he has to make a decision. And that decision has to do with, do I stick with, going with the plan, which in Aragorn's case would be making sure Frodo gets to the Mount Doom and finishes off the quest. And in Sam's case is take the ring to Mount Doom and finish the quest. Or do I do something else, which is like what I know to be my duty and let Providence take care of the rest, which in Aragorn's case is following Merry and Pippin and rescuing them, and in Sam's case is my job is to stay with my master Frodo no matter what. Well, it turns out Sam's decision initially is a mistake because he decides practically somebody's got to finish the quest. And then he later realizes, I can't do this on my own. And then he finds out, oh, Frodo might be alive. And, everything turns around. But his initial decision is to take the ring, and it's a hard decision for him to make. But he's assuming Frodo is dead. He lacks full information. Just like Aragorn lacked full information. Although Aragorn had a lot more of the pertinent information than Sam does up front. By the time he makes that initial decision anyway. Sam does not. Sam is under the impression, the very, very wrong impression, that Frodo has died. He's gone. There's nothing more he can do. And so it seems like the only thing left to do, and this is not to fault Sam, obviously, because he's right, the only thing left to do is to take the ring and try to finish the quest. What else is there if you think Frodo's dead? Now, of course, the difference is he could have, maybe, I don't know, Tolkien obviously doesn't go into detail in terms of exactly how dead Frodo appears, other than the fact that he's not moving. Was there any sign of life, breath, pulse, anything like that? Would Sam have known how to check for pulse? Or, he doesn't get into all that, right? He just sees Frodo not waking up and assumes he's dead. Now, that's a bad assumption to make, in almost any scenario, unless you've got really obvious signs of death. But in this case, there aren't, right? He's there, he's intact, he's whole, he's not bleeding out, he's just motionless. And Sam, therefore, just assumes he's dead. Bad piece of misinformation, but it leads him to make a decision which, if the information was correct, probably would have been literally the only real option available to him. But it's not the only available option because his information was wrong. And in this sense, it's a little bit of a flipped script when it comes to Aragorn's choices, because Aragorn actually correctly analyzes the information he has and reaches the conclusion based on correct information and deductions from that information. Sam doesn't. That's one key difference, but the similarity, the parallel is still there. They're both working from imperfect information and having to make a hard choice in the face of a situation which does not give all the information. The other parallel here is that there's really only two choices to make, two options to choose from, rather. One of them is go with Frodo, or in Sam's case, stay with Frodo. And the other is go on and do something different, which in Sam's case is go finish the quest by yourself, and in Aragorn's case is instead of following Frodo, follow Merry and Pippin, rescue them. So there's only two available choices, really. Sam does contemplate a third choice, which is basically sit down and die or commit suicide, which, functionally it's the same thing. But he rejects that possibility for good and obvious reasons. The problem is the other choice in this case is the parallel is they are not Frodo. That's the parallel, but the significant difference between the two is one of them is there are two good options to choose from. And by good options, I mean both have worthy goals attached to them. Neither are bad in the sense that trying to rescue Merry and Pippin is inherently just a negative thing to do. No, obviously not. In Sam's case, both options actually are good, because obviously staying with Frodo, who is alive, and making sure he doesn't get captured by orcs would be a nice thing, but also finishing the quest is a good thing. But Sam, of course, not knowing that Frodo is alive, doesn't really see a good purpose or outcome in that first choice. He is stuck in a position where he's like, I have a really bad option, but which I feel is kind of like what I'm supposed to do because that's my job. And then I have a good option over here, which is kind of necessary for the entire world to be saved from Sauron. When you put it in that light, it's obvious why Sam picks the route that he does. He only later changes his mind because he just can't overcome the sense in his mind, like, I must stay with Frodo. And then he finds out that Frodo is alive, and then he's like, man, I knew that was right all along, and I just didn't go with it. But, this is the difference between the two. Sam is put in a tremendously harder situation than Aragorn actually is, which makes Aragorn's choice much seemingly easier. But if you think about it, it's not actually that much easier. Both of them are faced with, do I make sure that the quest has a shot at succeeding? Or do I do what seems to be like the thing that I am being pushed towards? Sam has always felt like he had something that he was being pushed towards, and that thing was Frodo. Frodo is my job. Not the quest, Frodo. Aragorn has this thing that he's being pushed towards, which is Minas Tirith. And it's not the quest per se, but faced with the choice, it's like, I could go to Minas Tirith, but is that going to do any good if the quest fails? And are Frodo and Sam going to be able to finish the quest all by themselves? The choice seems easy to us as readers in retrospect because we know how everything turns out, and we know all of Frodo's thinking, and we know everything else. Aragorn, who does not know all these things, and who is looking at the possibility, the very real possibility, of Frodo and Sam going off on their own and just getting lost in the Immin Muil and dying of starvation, potentially, or who knows what else. Looking at that, Aragorn choosing not to follow Frodo is really choosing against the grain, you might say. There's nothing practical about that decision at all. And that's what makes it kind of similar to Sam's. Sam ends up making the practical decision initially, but thinking that it's the only real option. It's because, again, he's lacking that full information. So this is why I say Sam's situation is kind of like Aragorn's on steroids. Aragorn has most of the information he needs, or at least can deduce or infer most of the information that he needs, and as a result has a better sense of what he can choose based on, but he still has a really hard choice to make, and that choice is not as hard as what Sam will choose later, but it's still a really tough one. So it's just really interesting to compare how both of them, acting with imperfect information, choosing between two things which one of them seems compelling versus the other which seems like the right option. You see what I mean? One of them is right, but the other one seems to demand that you go with it anyway, because it's the one that hinges on which everything else hinges. you wouldn't want to be Samwise in that chapter, and you wouldn't want to be Aragorn in, the other chapter either. I mean, you wouldn't want to be either one of them because you're literally making decisions upon which the fate of Middle Earth hangs. And in either case, but especially in Aragorn's, who has been having the worst month or two of his life, probably, thinks that every choice he makes is just an utter disaster. It's like, well, shucks. What am I going to do now? I have to make a decision, and every decision I make is terrible, and I'm probably about to doom us all. But Aragorn has this moment. My heart speaks clearly at last. He's like, I know. And notice he says my heart. He doesn't come up with this answer by thinking it through, seemingly. It's like he gets a sense of, yes, Providence is going to take care of what it's going to take care of. That's not my job anymore. Never was my job, really. And so as a result, he has to go do what he has to do. And there's a bigger topic here, which I'm working on for an idea too in the future, so be on the lookout for it. But it has to do with decision making in the Lord of the Rings, and I think I have a theory about it. And if I can get enough of the information I need, it'll be kind of an interesting look at how these decisions get made in the Lord of the Rings and their implications. But that's for another video. But that's pretty much a wrap for this video, so if you enjoyed it, please do give it a thumbs up, share it around, subscribe to catch all my future content. If you're on YouTube, make sure to click the bell icon so you don't miss any notifications. Follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter's to catch Tolkien-related trivia questions on a regular basis, and there's other support and social links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore Channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially Nathan Dufour, Paul Leone, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.